the Wilseyville John Doe, identified as Brenda Sue O'Conor, and the Wilseyville John Doe, identified as Reggie Frisby. This is one of those rare cases where we know who did it, but we didn't know who our John and Jane Doe was. And I don't want to focus on perpetrators, but in this case, I feel like I have to give a little background. I've provided some links below, however. If anyone wants to know further details, I've linked a book on the subject, and there's a lot to be found if you Google it. For this video, I should mention, my focus always leads to who fell victim. So many channels cover major crimes so much better than I do. I cannot make myself be dramatic in any way, and I'm sure not everybody's cup of tea. I just want to pay tribute to those who fell victim. Anyway, I originally started a video for one doe identified, but it quickly became two, and the more I dug, I felt I needed to share a little more info about those who deserve so much more than what happened to them. It's not just our Jane and John Doe. In this case, we have a duo named Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, who unalived at least 11 people. Sadly, our Jane and John Does here, they would go unidentified for decades, only to be identified in 2025. They chose primarily acquaintances or people they met through classified ads. They usually unalive the men pretty quickly. They would dispose of them by throwing them into a giant grave that they dug on the property. But not everyone was found there. This would involve at least 11 known people over 11 months, but it's believed there were more than double that in total. Leonard Lake and Charles Ng in this case operated from a cabin in Wilseyville, California. This area is an unincorporated area of Calaveras County. Leonard Lake had been a Marine, but he was diagnosed with a personality disorder and he was given a medical discharge. He became obsessed with nuclear holocaust and survivalism. This was in part what led to him living in a cabin in the area. Sometime along the way, he met Charles Ng, who was a citizen of Hong Kong and was living in the U.S. under a student visa. Ng even obtained a fake ID, and he would enlist in the Marines. This ended badly, however, with him being ejected from the Marines after stealing weapons from the military base. In addition to having mental health issues, both shared a propensity for hurting others. Ng would thankfully get caught while stealing a vise from a hardware store, and this was in San Francisco, California. Ng did escape at the time, but they were able to identify the car, and this would lead to their house of cards beginning to crumble. Once they caught up to him, they find Leonard Lake also in the car with him, and inside this car was a gun that was registered to a missing person. To avoid accountability, Lake would unalive himself using a pill that he kept in the car, as they began to discover his and Lake's crimes. He could not control his compulsion to steal. This time he was caught. He had traveled to Alberta, Canada, and now they had him. Because by the time they caught him there, they knew enough about the duo's activities to make sure that this man would never see freedom again. While they knew without a doubt there were 11 victims, they would come to believe there was at least a dozen more, perhaps more beyond that. Only 6 of the known people have had their remains discovered. But they knew who they believe the victims are, at least up to 11. One was Leonard Lake's brother, and he had a mental disability. Leonard Lake would become Donald Lake and take over his life and cash his disability checks. This was in December of 1982. And then in 1983, he would unalive Charles Gunner, and Charles was his close friend. Gunner had even been the best man in Lake's wedding. Lake would invite his friend on a road trip, only to return driving Gunner's vehicle and cashing his disability checks. Charles' remains would eventually be found in 1992, when the owner of Lake's cabin would dig down in order to build a garage and instead found a buried person. It's possible there are still missing people buried on that property. The third victim is our John Doe today. Reggie Frisby would be identified in January of 2025, thanks to Genetic Genealogy. Reggie would have been just 29 when he was found in 1985. There's only one known photo of Reggie so far. There were reports that he wasn't reported missing. That always gets me a little bit because often that is not the case. Reports are lost or they weren't taken. There's so many things that happen over time. While looking for the name of the John Doe, they would make some sketches of Reggie, but they hit a brick wall and he would go unnamed for 40 years. Thankfully, DNA would provide the answer. Another victim who deserves to be mentioned is Jeffrey Dean Askin. He was 30 in 1985 when he went missing from Santa Clara, California. His missing Honda would eventually be found near the cabin. His remains have not been located so far. On July 11, 1984, Ronald Gillette was 36 years old. He had placed an ad that offered specific services to straight men at his apartment in San Francisco. The moment he opened the door, Lake attacked him and unalived him in the head. His roommate also met the same fate, but he would thankfully survive. In July of 1984, a young family would disappear after two men rang their doorbell, planning to buy something from the couple. Harvey Dubbs was 30 on that day, and his wife Deborah was 33. Sadly, their son, Sean Christopher Dubbs, had just barely celebrated his first birthday. They would find a receipt for some electronics, indicating they were purchased from the couple. That receipt was found at the cabin, further linking the group, and this is why they believe the family fell victim. Deborah was on the phone with a friend when it's believed Lake and Ing came to the door. Randy Jacobson was 35 when he was found on the cabin's property. He had disappeared from a San Francisco rooming house after becoming involved in a business deal with Lake. Jacobson would disappear from the same rooming house that Cheryl Lynn Okoro, who was 25, disappeared from. And they weren't done. Maurice Rock, who was 37, also disappeared from the same rooming house. They would discover later that Lake stayed in that rooming house using the name Alan Dre. Paul Stephen Costner was 39, had the misfortune of trying to sell a 1980 Honda Prelude to a guy he would describe as weird. When Lake came in to make the purchase, Paul disappeared, and the Prelude was actually found, and at the time it was being driven by Lake. It's unclear why that didn't tip the hand earlier. Clifford Paranto, 23, from San Francisco. He worked at Dennis Moving Company along with Charles Ing. Lake would later sell Cliff's motorcycle as if it was his own. Ing used his moving job with Jeffrey Gerard, a man who was 25. He disappeared, and they were last seen getting into Lake's car. And this leads us to our final Jane Doe and her family. We know now that Brenda O'Conor would go unidentified until March of 2025. At this time, Genetic Genealogy would finally give her back her name. It would also turn out she lived next door to the cabin. We know that when she was found, her boyfriend was with her, and unfortunately their child. Lonnie Wayne Bond Sr. was identified right away. He was 27 and lived with our Jane Doe. His girlfriend Brenda was 20 at the time, and their child Lonnie Wayne Bond Jr. His age appears on the screen. I do this to prevent them from turning the comments off in my video. Along with the young family, their friend Robin Stapley, 26, had also lived with the couple, and he went missing at the same time. Lake was caught driving the missing Honda Prelude, and at the time it had Lonnie's license plate attached to it. Brenda and Lonnie actually lived next door to Lake and Ing. It's unclear why our Jane Doe wasn't identified right away. We know that Lake had made remarks to Brenda that made her uncomfortable, although when they first became neighbors, they got along fine. It appears that Lonnie Sr. had gone over to confront Lake and Ing when they disappeared. The two men, Lonnie Sr. and Robin Stapley, were identified that same year. Brenda O'Conor would be interred with her other John Doe, Reggie Frisby, as John and Jane Does. They were exhumed in 2021 and finally identified in 2025. Brenda O'Conor would go unidentified for 40 years. Had she lived the life she deserved, she would be 16 years old today. Reggie Frisby went unidentified for 40 years. Had he lived the life he deserved, he would be 69 years old today. The Sawyers Valley John Doe. Sawyers Valley, West Australia. This case began on the 27th of August, 1979. A family was walking on this morning in the area, and it was around 5 p.m. They would discover what they described as a shallow grave, located around 115 feet or 35 meters from the entrance to Chidlow Rifle Ranch. Whoever placed our John Doe in that area is believed to have dragged him there, where someone had dug a very shallow grave. They would also say that branches partially concealed him. It's possible whoever shot him in his chest did so in a different place. The dark-haired man was around 178 centimeters tall, or 5'10". He was likely 30 to 50 years old in 1979. So that would mean his date of birth was around 1929 to 1949. His peers of that time would be in their 70s to 90s today. Investigators would note that he wasn't dressed for manual work, nor for safely walking around the bush in the area where he was found. His clothing is described as smart casual, with the clothing still in good shape, despite him passing 2 to 3 months before he was found. He had on a gray cardigan with green and white stripes, a yellow turtleneck, and a grayish-blue turtleneck jumper. His off-white jeans were Yakka brand, and he had a silver belt buckle on his belt. His shoes were in a size 8. That would equal a men's size 9 here in America. He had on a Seiko Actus watch that is still currently being produced and sold on the Japanese market. If anyone knows who he may have been, please contact Crime Stoppers at the number or code given. You can remain anonymous. The Sweet Valley John Doe has gone unidentified for 45 years.
Huge thanks for watching all the way to the end, and a big thanks to all of you who consistently like and comment on the videos. The whole dance with YouTube is hard sometimes. Whether you leave a full comment or an emoji, it makes a huge difference. It's a huge push toward the videos being suggested to new people. The next goal is 20,000. Thanks everyone for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other.